Okay, Scooter, look, it's a great day to go fly.
Engine throttling up, 3 engines down, 104%.
Go with throttle up.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The future is here. Safe connected flight, intelligence-based technologies, smart defense systems, Raytheon Technologies.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the closing plenary session. It's hard to believe we're at the end of 3 days. This session, Diversity in the IC, does reality match aspiration? It is my pleasure to welcome Tom Ritchie, Vice President of Business Development, Raytheon Intelligence and Space, who will introduce our moderator. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction. Raytheon Intelligence and Space is proud to once again support INSA and AFCEA as a sponsor of this important event. While many events and gatherings were canceled this year, these two great organizations still found a way to ensure we could come together in support of the uniformed and civilian personnel of the intelligence community, the true unsung heroes working in defense of our nation. We are really living in challenging times. Conversations on matters of equity and equality are occurring across our nation. It is fitting as we come together in our own community to have this important conversation as well. Our community knows and values that it takes a diverse set of talents and perspectives to protect our nation. What a tremendous privilege it is to be associated with so many talented and dedicated professionals who are committed to living those values every day. Among them is the moderator of today's session. Lieutenant General Vincent Stewart leads GSIS's cybersecurity practice. He retired from the United States Marine Corps after more than 38 years of distinguished active commissioned service to our nation. A career intelligence officer with experience in national defense, cybersecurity, information technology development, and customer support. He served around the globe in leadership positions for both the Marine Corps and the National Security Agency, specializing in signals intelligence and cyber operations. He is also the recipient of numerous distinguished awards from his Marine Corps service and service to our nation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Lieutenant General Vincent Stewart to lead us in this important discussion.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I looked at the lineup for INSA this last couple of days, and what a phenomenal lineup. And recognizing that we are the last event before we can all go to happy hour and end the week, we're going to try to make this as lively as possible. And we're going to try to make sure that at the end of this session, you walk away going, they saved the best for last. Having said that, though, we're not gonna be necessarily pleasant. We're going to be raw about the topic we're going to discuss today. Because it is an important topic as we think about where we are as a nation and where we are in our organizations and what do we want to be when we really get grown up. And so we're going to talk about diversity in the intelligence community, and what framed this conversation is probably the death of George Floyd and what occurred in the streets of New York City, where we saw an individual murdered before our eyes, an 8-minute, 45-second video. And what struck me when I saw that video was just anger and dread and fear, not just for me, but for my children and my grandchildren. And I saw the two images that stuck in my mind. And I have to tell you this because it frames the context of this conversation about diversity and inclusion. And first image was the officer, I forget his name now, with his knee on the neck of George Floyd and the dominant position and George Floyd's eyes as he looked in terror and fear about what was going on. And then the second image, 8 minutes or so later, with the lifeless body of George Floyd and again, the nonchalant position of Officer Corbin. And it struck me at that point more than anything else that I could, first of all, no longer be silent about what had occurred. I had to speak out. It's not something that I've done routinely throughout my career, but I had to speak out because I was worried about my children and my grandchildren, all the things that I've encountered over the course of my career, that we were still in this position where we are African-American male in particular, not valued as much and is much easier to abuse and kill than I've seen in a long time and continue to see. And so I had to speak up. And I was drawn to the words of our Constitution and the words of our Declaration of Independence and talking about all men created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I was also drawn by the fact that in spite of it all, I had risen to a level in the government that is pretty significant, but I endured a good bit getting from there to here. And so when we started to do this panel, we thought about bringing together the heads of agencies or their EEO representative and talk about the programs, but we didn't want to just talk about programs. We wanted to bring real people in front of you to talk about their experiences and talk about what we might do differently. And so we got an incredible lineup of folks. I won't go through their biography because it's extensive pioneers in the space. What should worry you a little bit is we probably have all of the people of color in the intelligence community here in this panel. It's not true, but yeah. So we got Stacy Dixon on the panel, the deputy director at NGA today. We got Maisha Glover, who's over at McKinsey Group Consulting. We got Carmen Medina, longtime CIA employee, and Frank Taylor. And so we're going to try to keep this lively today and leave some time for question and answer for the audience. And going back to where I started, what really brought us here is the George Floyd murder. And I was very curious as I was thinking about this. Carmen, you've seen a lot in your lifetime. I was wondering what your reaction was to that video. If you saw that video, what was your reaction to it as you saw yet another person of color murdered in the streets of our cities?
Thanks, by the way, for having me on the panel. So, you know, I don't watch videos of people suffering. I think the human being has too much dignity for us, it's my personal opinion, for us to be voyeurs when they're in a period of suffering. But I couldn't avoid snippets of it. And my reaction to the George Floyd video was, how can in 2020 this kind of thing be routinely happening? And of course, it does routinely happen because there have been several other instances of what appears to me to be the lives of people of color being devalued by law enforcement. And I just think that's tremendously wrong. And what's wrong about it can't be solved, to refer back to a point you made, can't be solved by programs. You know, you talked about having all the EEO and heads of agencies in to talk about their programs. Well, you know, we got plenty of programs. We got all the programs we need. Probably there are some people in the audience or members of the intelligence community or companies who feel like they've been over-programmed, right? And so the programs aren't fixing the problem. And I really think, and it's a real chicken egg catch-22 situation, the problem can't be fixed until the distribution of power in our society, as reflected by senior positions in organizations, for example, is evenly distributed. And that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of hard work by all of us.
I'm going to come back to the distribution of power issue in a little bit. Anybody else on the panel want to opine on the George Floyd video?
I'll certainly chime in. It was very, very difficult to watch. And I think the fact that there is a lot more video out there to capture these situations, that part is good. I'm with Carmen. I don't want to watch people suffering, but you do wonder if a lot of these things would come to light otherwise. And the fact that they are now has enabled us to have a dialogue over and over and over again that was not happening before the images were so stark and in everyone's face and in every social media feed. So I'm appreciating the fact that we have leaders in the community and in the intelligence community, and certainly in my agency, who are willing to have the conversation about it in public settings in front of the workforce, letting them know this is unacceptable. And behaviors like this that are geared in beliefs of whatever the beliefs are, superiority or just the fact that someone's different and someone's lesser, have no place in our organization. It's opened up a space for conversations like that, which we will not let stop after the videos stop showing. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Frank, did you want to, you looked like you wanted to say.
Well, I was just thinking about the video, and the thing that struck me about this video, unlike all the others, is real time. And I'm reminded of, I was U.S. Ambassador for Counterterrorism on 9/11, and the image of those jets going into those 2 buildings in New York hit a part of humanity across the world that I don't think bin Laden ever understood. And I think the same is true of that video. That video, people have been talking about police brutality or harassment and all the other issues, but to see it live and to see a life snuffed out, I think went to the raw emotions of human beings that said, this just isn't right. We can't allow this to continue. So in that sense, it became a spark, I think, for people to really become introspective of what they had heard before, what they had ignored before, and to say, this stuff really happens and we need to do something about it. Over.
Yeah. Maisha, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but.
I would just add that as a mother of young Black boys, it shook me to my core, because here I am raising the next generation, hopefully that will have major impact for our nation and our society. And so it was just a reminder of what's happening still in our country. And so it shook me to my core. That said, it also provided me an additional call to action, which is, as Stacey had mentioned, this has provided a medium for conversation, but it also has provided us a medium for education, for opening up and sharing what is actually happening that this video just happened to catch. And so there are many of our colleagues and coworkers that just had no idea. This wasn't their background, their perspective. And so this has allowed us to help educate them and provide additional perspective.
So the video lit a spark. And a lot of organizations have put out wonderful letters going, basically, my thoughts and prayers are with you. We understand, we love you. We think diversity and inclusion is important. But now what? And that's the question I ask many of these organizations. Now what? You've done the letter, you've checked the box. What's your perspective? And I'll make this a jump ball, whoever wants to go for it. Are we, in fact, doing anything different? And if so, what can we do different now that we have this spark?
I want to say something to that, but also follow on with the video theme. Because, it would be something if we had video inside our organizations that shone a light on the behavior that goes on in meetings, in offices, in the hallway, the conversations that would, I think, help clarify the dynamic that's going on in organizations. And intelligence community, we're not, I don't think, particularly bad, or, this would apply to all organizations. What if there was video that illuminated what the problem was, right? So, are we doing anything different? Are we doing anything powerful enough? My instinct is that it remains top down and programmatic, and it really has to be more spiritual and in the heart. And we have to become self-aware of all of our actions in how we promote or help sustain a culture of non-diversity, a culture where we worry a lot about the other, whoever the other is, and then therefore that affects how we think about each other.
So here's, and I'll let someone else jump in, but let me react to that because here's what I hear, and here's why the conversation and the observations are so difficult. You have one side that says that embraces the victim status, and I use that very cautiously, that word. We are the victims of systemic abuse, systemic racism, systemic trends from slavery through today. And the other side, especially in the modern side, says, but I have nothing to do with that. I really am colorblind, and I didn't have any slaves, and I really love everybody. So why are you making me feel like feel guilty? How do we get to the point where we can have that conversation where those two raw emotions that can then be observed allows us to move past the victim guilt piece and have a meaningful conversation about who we are, how we trust each other, and how we can view each other as not one group is still 3/5 of a person, but truly a person with all the full rights. How do we get past that? Because that's the question I get more than anything else. How do we start the conversation and make it productive rather than all of us going to a defensive crouch as we start the conversation?
Vince, it's a great question. And I'm reminded, there's a requirement for Air Force flag officers to have annual civil rights training. I think it's true throughout all of the military. And I was at, this was 20 years ago, before I retired, at this training, and a very good friend of mine, Caucasian general, after the end of the session, he said, do you get discriminated against? And it was a very innocent question. But I said, when I'm in uniform and the stars on my shoulder and people see me, they salute me because of the uniform. But let me walk into the BX looking like I normally do on a Saturday afternoon and have people following me through the store thinking that I'm going to shoplift. That's the issue that people need to understand. It's not about what they do. It's about how people in general in our society are treated, not because of who they are, but because of the color of their skin, and are underestimated in what they can be and who they are and what they bring to the table simply by what they look like. And if you can start in understanding that, it's not us against them. It's an experience that as a member of the majority, you don't have. But that experience is being felt by people who are within your area of responsibility or within your command. So that to me was a poignant time where a very good friend and colleague didn't understand that once out of uniform, I was just another black man and was treated in a different way than he would be in the same circumstance at the VX on a Saturday afternoon. Over.
And I'm seeing a lot of those conversations happening as well with colleagues in the workplace wanting to know more about the experiences of their colleagues who are people of color, and people and other colleagues in the mainstream realizing that their experience, they can't assume that everyone else has the same experiences that they have. And it's sort of opening up the conversation. We're trying to also give them tools to be able to have these conversations productively. Because as you mentioned, Vince, it can get very, very quickly to a place where someone's all of a sudden feeling guilty, and you don't like feeling guilty, so all of a sudden it's a negative conversation. Let it just be a conversation where you're having some sort of realizations. So we're trying to give the supervisors and those that want to lead these conversations tools to help them know words that you might want to be careful about, stay away from. How do you diffuse situations when emotion creeps in? Because this is very emotional for everyone. But the most productive things I've seen are people willing to share and willing to listen. And I want to make sure that continues. So in terms of what are we doing differently, we already were trying to have conversations about opportunities and making sure that no one's disadvantaged. But these conversations, colleague to colleague, are different. And our goal will be to keep them going so that we can all learn a different side of each other. And then hopefully that will build those bridges to allow those other types of things to not happen, at least amongst our workforce.
I would say we're also advancing the conversation from just diversity and now having a more robust conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So it's not just about who is in the workforce, but it's also about the policies, the norms, the practices that we do on an everyday and to ensure that a person's identity does not predict the opportunities that they have before them, right? It's about the inclusion aspect, which, General Stewart, I'm very passionate about. It's about how someone feels in the workplace. So these discussions that we're talking about that we want to continue, we want to make sure that we're not having those conversations about what it looks like and how we feel outside of uniform. We want to be able to have those conversations during the day, right? Where we can bring our whole self to work and actually bring our true and authentic self every single day. And so I think that is another advantage of this travesty, is that we're now having a more robust conversation. Now we actually have to continue to advance the conversation.
I want to, if I can, just follow up on something Stacy said, where she's talking to people about how to have these difficult conversations. And I think that's an important point to highlight, that one of the reasons why I believe we haven't gotten further in diversity in organizations is that organizations and their managers are not versed in dealing with diversity tension. Diversity tension is a natural part of having people with different backgrounds on the same team. And in fact, it's that tension between the different views that will get you greater insight. And if you can harvest and manage that diversity tension, you will be much stronger. But organizations have failed managers. Managers are taught to execute and get things done and they're not given enough training, nor are just your colleagues, on, tension, productive argument. And I think we have to be able, and I think there are best practices that you can share with people that will make these conversations more effective.
Yeah, I used to call them constructive conflict, and we are not at all comfortable with. It immediately it's personal rather than here's the real issue that we need to get after. But the good news, I guess he says a little bit sarcastically, is we don't have those issues in the intelligence community. We have good programs that are developed to take care of diversity and inclusion and deal with bias. And those programs are fully supported by our leadership in those organizations, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's grenade number one.
Good. Yeah, so there are a lot of programs, and there's mandatory training, there's training about unconscious bias, but I'm with Carmen. It really does take a change of heart in many cases, because, and I loved your comment, Carmen, about the videotaping what happens in the workplace. And although that definitely won't happen in our workplace, I don't think people understand the extent of the impact they have, the negative impact and positive impact they can have on their colleagues. You know, whether it's a microaggression, something that a person says very innocently that just sets somebody off, or just really makes them feel a certain way. We're trying to help people understand those types of words and those kinds of triggers, both from the, hey, don't do this, as well as this is the unintended consequence this is going to have in this person actually trusting you. So programs are out there. We're continually learning from the research on how to better do this. But no, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go to be able to not only look more like the country, but look more like the world that we're trying to understand and be aware of, so that we can bring our insights back to our policymakers and decision makers.
I'm coming back to you, Maisha. We could spend the next 4 hours talking about microaggression. And if you were to talk to folks and go, okay, here's what microaggression is, it will be a new concept to a whole host of folks who miss the subtleties, that things that we say and do in the workplace. Maisha, over to you.
You know, I was just going to add that, you know, in terms of the timing of this dialogue right now, it's really important for us, because we're spending a lot of time not just thinking about a diverse workforce, but also the next generation and bringing in younger people into the workforce, right? And so research says, I mean, McKinsey has done tons of studies on diversity matters and diversity wins. And, you know, the research shows that the younger generation is 2 times more likely to raise the need for inclusion. That means belonging, feel like they can bring their true and authentic self, have these raw conversations at the workforce, and not be, you know, afraid of things. They feel this way. They're more than 2 times more likely to raise the need for inclusion than our older employees. And so when we think about the thrust and the focus about bringing in the next generation and digital talent and everything else, then this is a conversation and that we need to have. But more importantly, there are more robust actions and steps and training that we need to take place.
Yeah, so who owns this then? Because, you know, we can always go, okay, maybe we need legislation, maybe we need the next generation. Who owns turning the ship? Is this a leadership issue? Is this a legislative issue? How do we get past the talking piece? Frank, you want to take that?
Well, I mentioned as we talked about this session, my experience as a young officer who almost didn't get my first job because I happened to be African American, and the courage of my boss, Dr. Charlie Russell, who didn't tell the leadership of AFCEA at the time that Francis X. Taylor from Notre Dame was not a freckle-faced, red-haired Irish kid, but a brother from, you know, Southeast DC, that he wanted to hire. He hired me despite breaking a taboo of not having an African American in the counterintelligence division. So it took courage and leadership by Dr. Russell. And as a result of that courage and leadership, Frank Taylor retired as the commander of the organization that almost denied me my first opportunity. So it's leadership. It's leadership in everyone who has responsibility as a leader has a responsibility to lead diversity and inclusion in their organization, even if it's 2 people, and understanding the impact of that and moving forward, because only through courage and the courage of conviction and action can these things change. Over.
I wanted to have the opportunity to talk about leadership because in many cases, even some of the best leaders think somebody else is going to solve this one. And it's all of us. It's everybody who's in a leadership position, whether you're leading 2 people or 2,000. You get the opportunity to set the conditions, and you get the opportunity to create things that will not happen organically if you're not directly involved in making that difference. So I think the message to all who's listening, whether you're leading 2 or 20,000, you get to carry this burden along with, and you can't wait for legislation, and you can't wait for the next generation, and you can't wait for, you've got to step in and make a difference today. Anybody else want a shot at this one? Frank, it's okay if you come back in if you have more to add.
Well, you know, it's kind of like you can't assume someone else is going to do your job. And, you know, when I do recruiting, the answer, well, where are we going to find this talent? Well, it's all over. You're just looking in the wrong place. Mm-hmm. So if you only go to American University or GW or Georgetown, you're not going to find the same diverse talent as if you go to the University of San Antonio, University of Texas San Antonio, or other Hispanic serving institutions or HBCUs to do recruiting of quality people. You know, this notion that, well, we can't find qualified people has become a crutch. The qualified people are there. You have to go look for them, and you have to look for them systematically. That, to me, is the leadership imperative.
And I would agree that the leadership conversation needs to be constant and consistent, and talking about the importance of diversity and, you know, especially inclusion is something that, you know, we try to do. I always try, and I say everyone's a leader to try to cover everyone, but every individual and every interaction they have with every single person every day can have an impact. So that's what I try to make that point, that literally you, yourself, any interactions you have is an opportunity to learn from someone else, to treat someone else with respect, treat someone else the way you want to be treated, the way you want your family members, your children to be treated, and try to get that's always going through their head. So you would not necessarily ever then see someone treating someone disrespectfully, because automatically in their mind it'd be like, oh, I wouldn't want to be treated that way. Right now, I don't think we have that sort of level of consciousness about how we interact with others.
But yeah, okay, I buy some of the leadership stuff. You've heard what I said about leadership. But if I just work hard, won't I make it to the top? Isn't this a merit-based system that if I just grind away, roll my sleeves up and get after it, then even if I have bad leaders who don't take care of me, I'm gonna be successful?
No,
Oh.
that's not the way that it works. I mean, the rules, I mean, one of the things all organizations have to do is look at the rules, sort of the written and unwritten rules about advancement and the qualifications, the merit qualifications, and look at those and ask yourself, are these really, you know, colorblind or opportunity blind? Because you know what? I bet they aren't. Everything that we are living in, our culture is a culture that has been sort of West European from its outset. And in fact, you know, a lot of the people who are opposed, I mean, I've heard the argument opposing diversity, which is that we want to preserve our West European cultural roots. And there's another phrase I could use, but I'm being polite. So, you know, we need to look at some of what we've laid out as the aspects of meritocracy to think if they really are, you know, objective. And, you know, working parents see this all the time when, you know, being able to put in long hours, that's like something that'll get you promoted. And if you're not able to put in long hours, well, that's too bad for you. So I don't think that hard work gets you ahead. In fact, during my career at CIA, I counseled way too many employees of color and tried to help them understand why the system wasn't working for them. And many of them were brilliant people. Some of them finally succeeded and are in senior positions today. But their path was not easy and often delayed.
Okay. All right. Anybody else want to? Because you used the two words that I was going to and this it doesn't apply to the merit question, but one of the things that the words you used were colorblind. And I get told all the time, I really don't see color. I'm colorblind. Anybody have a reaction to that? Because generally what I tell folks now is, unless you're truly colorblind, that's probably not an accurate statement. Anybody want to tackle that one?
You walk in the room, you are who you are. And recognizing that you're an African American or Hispanic American is okay. That's not being colorblind, it's being a realist and understanding who's in front of you, and that person may, not from a knowledge or an ability point of view, be different, but their cultural experiences may be different, and you may not be able to deal with that individual in the same way you would with a person that grew up in your neighborhood that happens to be Caucasian. So recognizing difference, and not difference from a negative perspective, but difference from a positive perspective is very, very important. And the notion of being colorblind, no. You know, you see me, you see who I am, recognize that who I am may be different than who you are. And that's not bad.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I don't, we make some judgments about people based on the impression as they walk in the door. You know, we can see a young Caucasian person with a nice full head of hair and he looks like a future CEO, and we start going, yep, he's got CEO hair, therefore he ought to get certain advantages. We see someone who is overweight and we go, oh, that person is overweight, and therefore, so to suggest that when you walk in the door as a person of color, we don't see that is probably not an accurate statement.
And you know, sometimes it's deliberate and sometimes it's unconscious. I mean, yeah. Unconscious biases is, we all do it, right? It doesn't matter what background, what race, what ethnicity, we all have unconscious biases. And so, you know, when you have the opportunity as a leader to, you know, send someone else to go to a meeting in your stead or attend a conference with you or in your stead, do you just pick, you know, Courtney or Roger because you're used to picking them and, or that they're right beside you? Or do you consciously make a decision to think about your entire team and workforce to maybe give others an opportunity, right? And so if we're not doing that, then unconscious biases also affects the promotion and the advancement of people.
At the end of the day, though, unless anybody else want to jump in? Okay, unless once you get past all of this, though, isn't this really just about getting some extra quotas that will get you to the C-suite or the top of the pyramid? In all of this discussion about taking advantage of the situation now to create some numbers that will shift, I think, the distribution of power. Anybody want that grenade?
No, but no. Let's flip it the way that it should be, right? So it's making sure that there are no barriers unnecessarily keeping everyone from having the opportunity to have those experiences, the exposure, the educational opportunities to, and the assignments to be able to reach that level. So no to the quotas, but I do think it's important to make sure that we aren't disadvantaging certain segments of the population in preference for others, people who are more used to, people who look like us, people who have the same background, whatever the case may be. I agree with Maisha completely. Biases are going to exist, but you have to be aware of them and aware of their impact on others. The quota thing, too much baggage there, number one, also against the law in many cases, if not all. So let's look at how do we make sure that the opportunities are fairly distributed.
Yeah, I kind of see quotas as, talking about quotas as a cop-out. You know, it's easy to dismiss diversity by, they want quotas. They want us to hire unqualified people into these roles so that they can have their quote numbers. This isn't about quotas. It's not about affirmative action. It's about affirmative behavior to go look for talent. And I don't know a leader in the world that doesn't go looking for talent to improve their organization. When I was at GE, we opened a business in Africa, and 95% of the leaders of that business in Africa happened to be Caucasian. When the CEO of that business left after 7 years, 95% of the leaders of that business in Africa were Africans. He made a conscious decision to find qualified people to lead that organization in Africa that looked like the customers they were visiting. No drop off in quality, no drop off in performance, no drop off in expectations. And they built, I can't remember the exact number, but maybe a 300 or 400% increase in bottom line over that same period of time. So it's not about quota, it's about quality and candidates who are diverse and can perform in an effective way in the roles that all of you have in your organizations. Over.
So, okay, I get the leadership, I get the merit piece, I get all that. But my organization's been pretty effective. They're delivering, they're meeting their goals and objectives. What's diversity going to add to this mix? How's diversity going to make me incrementally better as an organization?
So there is research that links diversity of a population, especially a population matching the customers that they're trying to serve, having higher profitability. So if you aren't going to diversify, how do you know you're not going to get better at it? So that would be sort of my argument to that one point there. When you're working in government where profit isn't your motive, it's all about the outcomes. It's all about what we're able to do for the country. We got too many challenges not to find a way to leverage every single person who's willing to have a role in national security. So that's sort of my argument for why diversity, and then inclusion will follow because we need it to work.
Yeah, I would add that, the mission imperative for us to have an inclusive workforce, without having this greater diversity of thought, it's a risk. It's a risk to our national security. So it is a national security imperative. The Honorable Sue Gordon, during the panel that she led the other day, she ended with, what makes you hopeful? And each of the leaders spoke about talent, the workforce. That was the focus. It was the people. It wasn't automation. It wasn't talking about, some type of technology. They each ended in the people, the workforce. So if we believe, right, that is the national security imperative for us to have a diverse workforce, that is the bottom line. That is the impact of why we do this. The inclusion aspect is, as I mentioned, diversity is about the actual people that are in the workplace. The inclusion is like, how do we keep them? How do we retain them? How do we make sure that after we have done all that we've done in terms of reaching out to those HBCUs and these great creative commercials for recruiting, how do we make sure that they can feel comfortable with speaking up so that we truly can have the diversity in thought and they don't just leave out?
It is often viewed as, if I want to grow diversity in my organization, and I recruited 100 last year, if I recruit 200 next year, I'll more diverse and they'll rise to the top. And we forget the 25 who are in the middle, who don't feel like they're part of the organization, who in many cases are your best recruiters. Because if they feel that they're contributing and there's opportunity for them in the future, they're going to go back to their neighborhoods or their network and go, come join me. If they don't feel that way, they're going to go back to their network and go, I'm moving someplace else. Do not join company or organization X. So an awful lot of times we go after, let's grow the base because we'll have a higher percentage at the top of the pyramid. And we completely ignore retaining the highest talent and not just people of color, but the highest talent of people in our organizations. And because we always say the same thing, we always say it's about the people, and then we go and try to find some technology. And we go, okay, I got it. Is it really about the people? Retention of the quality folks in the levels of our organization is absolutely essential to growing a diverse and inclusive. I'll just pick up a little bit on the inclusive portion. I get an awful lot of interest in me sitting on boards, and I look at the board composition. I'll go, okay, I know why they're asking for me now. They need some folks of color. But if you I can get diversity by going, I need 6 Maishas and 2 Carmens, and I can get diversity that way. How do I create as a leader the environment that says, you are welcome here, we value your views, we value your ideas, and speak up, because it's okay. You won't be looked at as, oh, we got him here, why the hell is he talking? So
well, I think sometimes, Vince, we make the mistake of thinking that the diversity requires a different set of talents than what you need to deploy to just be a good manager. And there is one thing that we talked about earlier, which is, being able to deal with discomfort and managing diversity tension. But otherwise, you should be conducting yourself as a leader so that it's clear to everyone that reports to you that you welcome anything they have to say, short of name calling, that they think will contribute to a better mission. And there's just simple vocabulary that we can use as leaders that will make us more effective. So for example, you talk at a meeting, you spend way too much of the time in the meeting with you talking. And then at the end of it, you ask, are there any comments? Well, of course there aren't any comments, because that's usually the term that signals the end of the meeting. Well, how do you conduct yourself differently? And this it works for diversity, but it works for encouraging everyone to contribute to the maximum of their ability. You talk for much less time in the meeting, and then instead of asking any comments, you go, what did I get wrong? Or how would you do it differently? Or I know you've got something to add, Frank. Why don't you tell me what it is now? It's not hard to be more welcoming to different points of view. I actually think it's very simple.
You remind me of 2 things. One, I often tell folks that you have 2 ears in order to listen twice as much as you speak, which leaders sometimes forget that. And then the other thing in meetings is being mindful of body language, because you'll see someone in the audience that really wants to speak but doesn't think they should. And if you can pick that up and encourage them to, hey, Carmen, what are you thinking? That is incredibly powerful, not only in talking to that individual, but messaging to the group that other people's views or generally won't stand up are willing to stand up. Hey, folks, we can keep doing this. I've got about less than 15 minutes. I want to open this up to the audience for questions, and then we'll come back and wrap up. So if there are any questions, let's send them our way, and if not, I'll keep going here.
There was one question. I was looking at the questions on the chat board, General, and there was one question. Somebody asked, is the situation for people of color today the same as it was for women in the military 20 years ago? And I'm just curious what, I don't have expertise on being in the military, so I can't say, but what do you 2 think?
Frank, you want to take a shot at this first? I've got a strong opinion on this one, so.
Well, again, as we prepared for this, I spoke about my experiences 50 years ago undercover at Chanute Air Force Base, where there were riots, race riots on our military bases, and that the military leadership decided that we had to do something about it. And in that period, it was social actions and all those sorts of things to kind of bring awareness to leaders what had been happening. We've come a long way since then, but in many ways we haven't come as far as we need to come in order to provide an environment where, regardless of who you are, where you come from, what you look like, that if you've got the talent, you can achieve. I think it's something we strive to do. We've come, again, a long way since 50 years, but we've got a lot more work to do to move forward. Over.
So I'll give you this, and I'll use the Army as an example. The Army recognized several years ago that they were not, particularly in the military intelligence community, were not well represented on the women's side of the equation. And they made a very deliberate effort to get women who were very competent and capable into the right positions, into the right jobs, created opportunities. They didn't wait for it to happen organically. They systematically designed something, and now you look out there and you got the Karen Gibsons and the Mary Legers and all these, and none of them are weak hitters. They're all very competent, capable, deserving of the rank they achieved, but it was not an organic thing. And so if you're not deliberate, conversely, in the Army, the last African-American general that was promoted in the MI community was 25 years ago. And it doesn't, I can't believe there's not another African-American rising lieutenant colonel or colonel who should be competitive in that space. But they made a determined, concerted effort to make sure that it's just like being a head coach in the National Football League. If you get to be an offensive and defensive coordinator, you got a better chance of being a head coach. If we don't as an organization, and again, this is why I wanted to get to the issue of quota, but this is not going to happen organically unless you have a commitment to developing and advancing and preparing so that when you get to the top of the pyramid, you have 10 choices instead of one, and you go, I guess we better promote Vince Stewart because we ain't got anybody else. What I want folks to go is, holy cow, we had 10 choices and we could only pick one and the other 9 are just as good. But it's not going to happen organically. But I saw a very good case model for how the Army did in focusing on women and the intelligence community to a lesser extent. You don't get a Sue Gordon and a Stephanie O'Sullivan and a Stacy without a little bit of work. The question here is, any thoughts on moving forward despite the recent OMB memo? I have not read that memo. Apologies if this is too much of a grenade. Anybody OMB memo? Stacy?
The memo precluded certain teachings about, I think, race theory and white privilege, I believe, were the two specific things that it was banned funding training used that was based on those particular philosophies. We looked at what our training is. We have a lot of diversity and inclusion training, not based in those theories or research themes. So it doesn't really change what we're doing. I think it's unfortunate that we're trying to put bounds on this sort of period of time when we're trying to explore, and I certainly am one who leans on research heavily. There are certainly some benefits to looking at things from the perspectives of both of those topics. So, but we're not allowed to spend money on government training on those. So diversity and inclusion will continue. It does not impact that. We are somewhat limited in being able to bring in those other theories, particularly into our training.
That OMB memo, I wasn't, I know where we're going.
I'm assuming it was that one.
Anybody else have any thoughts on it before I tell you what I think?
Well, it's clear where the president's mind is in terms of what his priorities are, and that sends a signal. So I think it makes it very difficult to talk about diversity and inclusion when our political leaders are saying just the opposite. And, OMB didn't do that just because OMB wanted to do that. They did it at the direction of the president. To me, that is a challenge moving forward in how we conduct our dialogue, how we conduct our training. Truth is so and I understand everybody's truth is not everybody else's truth in this fake news world. But learning our history and understanding what our history has meant to all Americans, and in particular African Americans after the Civil War and Jim Crow, and all that period of history which we seem to gloss over, puts a perspective on where we are today. And those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it.
You know, you just stole my quote from George Santana. Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. But we, and to your point, I'm a historian. The history matters. The complete history matters. I hearken to the Declaration of Independence. Item number 27, if I remember correctly, grievance to the king was, don't mess with our slaves. Don't cause insurrections and violence. So there is a recognition of the impact, the economic impact of people of color and the natives in the region in number 27 comment to the king. And then we went through a deliberate period of time when we were trying to figure out if we were really fully a person or 3/5 of a person. So all of that history frames who we are and what we do and what we believe. And to not tell a complete story of history distorts our interactions with people of color or minorities or whatever we call them today. So yes, historians differ in opinions, but there's certain construct that all historians agree to. And until we tell the complete history, then we're going to have distorted behavior because we only get partial history. And that's, again, as a historian, I think it's important to tell the full history. How do we move to view diversity not as a bunch of deliberate programs, but specific populations as let me see if I can see the rest of this question, as a whole program where everyone can participate? How do we get from programmatics? I think Carmen touched on this a little bit earlier, but we got to get from programmatics because most people don't read the programs anyway.
Well, the intelligence community, if it's about anything, has to be about diversity of thought. If it's not about diversity of thought, it's just fooling itself. So diversity of thought includes everyone. Includes the engineers, it includes the artist, it includes your ethnic background, it includes, your socioeconomic status. All of that has to be involved. As an example, I was talking to someone who'd done some scenarios and gaming for a pandemic. And one of the things they failed to predict about the COVID response is that nobody played in the simulation the average American citizen. So there was a whole layer of thinking that was excluded. So we have to think about diversity as part of diversity of thought, which really I think has got to be the top priority of an intelligence organization. I want to be sure I've got every view captured in my workforce.
Okay, I was going to give you all one more round, but we're running out of time. And I want to ask a question to the audience that I was going to do up front, but I decided to put it on the back end. So here's my question for the audience. How would you feel if I told you that tomorrow morning when you woke up, you were going to be a person of color? And I don't mean Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods or some other special person of color, just some ordinary person of color. Would you race to go to bed? Let me adjust the question because I don't want this older generation to face this dilemma. So your son or your grandson, age 12, will wake up tomorrow morning as an African American. Would you put him to bed early because you're in such high anticipation that tomorrow this young man who I love so much is going to be a person of color, and I'm excited for him, and I love the idea, and I can't wait for it to happen? Or I'm going to keep him awake because I don't want him to wake up tomorrow morning. And the same question applies if you're a Black American and you had the opportunity to wake up tomorrow as a white person, would you turn in early or would you stay up late? How would you prepare for that? What are the questions and the concerns that you would have if you were in that situation? And the answer to that question doesn't mean it doesn't mean you're a bigot, it doesn't mean you, and if nothing else, it might mean a definition of privilege. Because in one or the other, it might be viewed as, wow, I am so glad I'm going to be the other side of the fence tomorrow. It may simply mean you have a bias. It certainly doesn't mean you're colorblind. So I leave that for you all to think about, and I'm going to stop talking and thank the panel members. I really appreciate your insights and your comments and your willingness to do this and to be raw about it. And thank you all so very much. You're my heroes, and I wish you all the very best. And I'm going to turn over to Tish Long.
Wow, what a tremendous way to conclude our program. A special thanks to Vince and all 4 of our panelists for their candor, insights, and integrity. That was a truly eye-opening session. While we are heading down the right path, it is clear that we still have significant work ahead to create a national security community that reflects the people it serves. As several of our panelists said, we need to learn how to have these conversations. So again, my thanks. Now, as we close out the whole summit, I would like to thank everyone for your participation these past few days. When we made the decision back in the spring to make this a virtual conference, we really didn't know how it would be received. These were uncharted waters. Today, I am pleased to report that we had record-breaking registration, nearly 3,000 attendees, not only from across the US, but from around the globe. And the feedback has been absolutely incredible. The conversations this week have reaffirmed the strength and the resiliency of our community and the enduring commitment to our shared national security mission. Now more than ever, strong collaborative partnerships between government, industry, and academia are needed to meet today's and tomorrow's threats and challenges. And all of us working together can truly turn those challenges into opportunities. In closing, thank you to all our speakers, the AFCEA and INSA staffs for executing a flawless event, and our sponsors and exhibitors. I would especially like to thank Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg, Bob Noonan, John Doyen, Ray Cross, Louis Shepard, Larry Hanauer, Jeff Levine, Gretchen Gunning, Toya Cribbs, Peggy O'Connor, Caroline Henry, Raleigh Levitt, Tina Vicioso, Julia Rapp, and Megan Dwyer, all of whom were absolutely instrumental to the event's success. Lastly, a special thanks to Bob Shea, who has been a tremendous partner with INSA, not only with this summit, but with our joint commitment to provide opportunities for public-private partnership within U.S. intelligence and across the broader national security landscape. Again, our sincere thanks to our sponsors and exhibitors who are so crucial to the summit. Thank you for joining us these past 3 days. We hope you will plan to join us again next year, September 13th and 14th, 2021, when we will hopefully be able to gather in person once again. Everyone take care, stay safe, and stay healthy.